15-second hook. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, the nation fell into shock, and power passed to a man few trusted and even fewer understood. Andrew Johnson rose to the presidency at America's most fragile moment, and in just 4 years, his decisions would nearly tear the country apart, leading to the first impeachment of a U.S. president, decided by a single vote. The night Abraham Lincoln died, the United States seemed to lose its balance. The Civil War was over, but the peace was thin and uncertain, like cracked glass ready to shatter. Cities mourned, soldiers wept, and millions of newly freed Black Americans looked toward the future with a mixture of hope and fear. In that fragile moment, Andrew Johnson became president, not through ambition or preparation, but through tragedy. Johnson was a man shaped by hardship. Born into poverty in North Carolina, he never attended school and taught himself to read. He rose through sheer will, becoming a tailor, then a politician, then governor of Tennessee. He despised wealthy elites and believed deeply in states' rights. To many, he was proof of the American dream. To others, he was unpredictable, bitter, and dangerously stubborn. Lincoln had chosen Johnson as his vice president in 1864 to signal unity. Johnson was a Southern Democrat who had remained loyal to the Union, and Lincoln believed his presence would help heal the nation after the war. But Lincoln never lived to guide that healing. Suddenly, the responsibility fell entirely on Johnson's shoulders. From the beginning, doubts surrounded him. On Inauguration Day as vice president, Johnson had delivered a rambling, embarrassing speech, reportedly drunk. Some dismissed it as a one-time lapse. Others saw it as a warning. As president, Johnson faced an impossible task: rebuilding the South, reintegrating former Confederate states, and defining freedom for 4 million formerly enslaved people. Congress, especially the radical Republicans, believed Reconstruction should transform Southern society, protect Black citizens, and ensure loyalty to the Union. Johnson believed something very different. He moved quickly, issuing pardons to former Confederate leaders and allowing Southern states to re-establish governments with minimal oversight. These new governments passed Black codes, laws that restricted the freedom of Black Americans, limiting their movement, labor, and legal rights. To Johnson, this was acceptable. He believed white Southerners should control their own affairs and openly doubted the ability of Black Americans to participate in democracy. When Congress pushed back, Johnson resisted. When lawmakers passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, granting citizenship and equal protection under the law, Johnson vetoed it. He claimed it gave too much power to the federal government and favored Black Americans unfairly. Congress overrode his veto. It was the first time in American history that Congress overrode a major presidential veto on civil rights legislation. It was also the moment the nation realized the president and Congress were no longer just disagreeing, they were at war. Johnson felt betrayed. He believed Congress was trying to destroy the Constitution. Congress believed Johnson was sabotaging Reconstruction. Neither side trusted the other, and compromise became impossible. As tension grew, Johnson traveled the country on what became known as the swing around the circle, giving speeches meant to rally public support. Instead, he embarrassed himself further. He insulted opponents, compared himself to Jesus Christ, and accused Congress of treason. Crowds heckled him openly. Newspapers mocked him mercilessly. Behind closed doors, Republican leaders began to speak the unthinkable: impeachment. Word count: 1,004. By 1867, the federal government was barely functioning as a united body. Andrew Johnson vetoed nearly every major Reconstruction bill Congress sent to his desk. Congress overrode nearly every veto. Laws were passed not because the president supported them, but because lawmakers had the votes to ignore him entirely. The most significant blow came with the Reconstruction Acts. These laws divided the South into military districts and required former Confederate states to ratify the 14th Amendment, guaranteeing equal protection under the law. Johnson vetoed the acts, calling them unconstitutional and dangerous. Congress overrode him again. Johnson's anger turned personal. He believed Congress, especially radical Republicans like Thaddeus Stevens, was abusing power and humiliating the presidency. He believed the country needed reconciliation, not punishment. But reconciliation, in Johnson's mind, meant restoring white Southern leadership as quickly as possible. At the heart of the conflict was the issue of race. Johnson openly opposed black suffrage and civil equality. In private conversations and public statements, he expressed racist views even by the standards of his time. He argued that granting rights to Black Americans would lead to chaos and corruption. For millions who had just been freed from slavery, his presidency felt like a betrayal. The final confrontation began with the Tenure of Office Act, passed by Congress in 1867. The law restricted the president's ability to remove certain federal officials without Senate approval. Its real purpose was clear: protect Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, a radical Republican ally. Johnson believed the law was unconstitutional, and he decided to challenge it directly. In February 1868, Johnson fired Stanton. Stanton refused to leave his office, barricading himself inside while Congress erupted in outrage. To Republicans, Johnson had crossed a line. He had openly defied federal law. Impeachment proceedings began almost immediately. The House of Representatives voted to impeach Andrew Johnson, making him the first president in U.S. history to face removal from office. The nation watched in disbelief. Never before had a president been brought so close to political destruction. The Senate trial that followed was tense and historic. Senators knew their votes would shape the future of the presidency itself. Should a president be removed for political defiance, or only for criminal behavior? Johnson's defense argued that impeachment was a political weapon, not justice. His accusers argued that allowing him to remain would cripple Reconstruction and betray the Constitution. The vote came down to a single ballot. 35 senators voted to convict. 19 voted to acquit. 1 vote short. Andrew Johnson remained president by the narrowest margin imaginable. But the damage was done. Part 2. Though Andrew Johnson survived impeachment, his presidency never recovered. He had lost all influence, all trust, and nearly all authority. Congress continued Reconstruction without him, passing laws and amendments over his objections. Johnson remained in office, but in many ways, he was already finished. The 14th Amendment was ratified despite his resistance, guaranteeing citizenship to former slaves. Later, the 15th Amendment would protect Black men's right to vote. These were victories for civil rights, but they came not because of Johnson but in defiance of him. Johnson grew increasingly isolated. Cabinet members resigned or distanced themselves. Political allies disappeared. Even members of his own party abandoned him. He stopped fighting publicly, knowing the battle was lost. In 1868, Johnson sought the Democratic nomination for president. He failed. The party moved on, and Ulysses S. Grant won the election easily. When Johnson left office in 1869, there was no celebration, no farewell tour, no sense of accomplishment. Historians would later describe his presidency as one of the weakest and most destructive in American history. Yet Johnson never admitted failure. He believed history would vindicate him. He believed Congress had overstepped. He believed he had defended the Constitution against tyranny. Until his death, he remained convinced he had been right. The country, however, paid the price. Reconstruction remained incomplete. White Southern resistance intensified. Federal protections weakened over time. Many gains for Black Americans were rolled back in the decades that followed, leading to segregation and disenfranchisement that would last nearly a century. Johnson's missed opportunity was enormous. He could have shaped Reconstruction with compassion and leadership. Instead, his prejudice and stubbornness hardened divisions and delayed justice. Even today, Historians debate whether Johnson was malicious or merely overwhelmed. But most agree on one point: his presidency failed at the moment America needed unity most. Part 3. Andrew Johnson's legacy is not just about what he did, but what he refused to do. He refused to adapt, refused to listen, refused to lead beyond his own beliefs. Presidents are often judged by crises. Johnson inherited the greatest crisis in American history and responded with resentment rather than vision. He saw Reconstruction as punishment, not opportunity. He saw equality as a threat, not a promise. The impeachment set a precedent that still echoes today. It clarified that presidents could be held accountable, but also showed how dangerous political warfare could become. The balance between executive power and congressional authority was permanently altered. Johnson's story serves as a warning. Leadership without empathy becomes cruelty. Power without humility becomes isolation. And moments of history do not wait for leaders to catch up. America moved forward despite Andrew Johnson, but never because of him.
Part 4.
In the end, Andrew Johnson's presidency stands as one of the greatest what-ifs in American history. What if he had embraced equality? What if he had worked with Congress instead of against it? What if Reconstruction had truly rebuilt the nation rather than postponing its reckoning? Those questions still matter, because the consequences of failed leadership can last generations. Andrew Johnson was not remembered as a unifier, a reformer, or a visionary. He was remembered as a man who stood in the way of progress at a moment when progress was desperately needed. And that is why his presidency remains one of the most controversial and most tragic in American history. Outro. Andrew Johnson stepped into the presidency at one of the most critical moments in American history and stepped away from the opportunity to heal a wounded nation. His story is a reminder that leadership is not just about holding power, but about rising to the moment when history demands courage, empathy, and vision. If this deep dive helped you understand why Andrew Johnson's presidency failed, share your thoughts in the comments. Like, subscribe, and join us as we continue exploring the presidents who shaped America.